you should leave your seat and move further down the bus. And you would be wise not to engage with her again for the rest of your journey. The Last Bus, written by Licker. The next passenger you'll meet is a scruffy middle-aged man known as the drunkard. He sits close to the back of the bus and is perhaps the type you would expect to find on a late-night service. I wouldn't recommend sitting too close to the drunkard, if only because he smells pretty bad, his breath stinking of alcohol and cigarettes. You'll note how his old clothes are soiled and torn, and his unkempt beard will be badly matted. You probably won't wish to engage with him, but the drunkard will begin a conversation with you regardless, and against your better judgment will get drawn in. The drunkard will turn out to be surprisingly intelligent and insightful, seeking to educate you on such matters as religion, philosophy, and scientific theory. He'll tell you a story in the form of a parable or fable, one with a dark twist to it. When I first met the drunk, he recounted to me the tale of the frog and the scorpion, one that demonstrates the cruel and destructive nature of life. Next, he'll remove a silver hip flask from his inside jacket pocket and offer you a drink. Regardless of your alcoholic preferences, you'll be tempted to take a sip, but of course, you must refuse him. After you turn down the drink, the drunkard will shoot you an angry look before shaking his head and saying, "You're a damn fool, a stupid little child. You have no idea what you're dealing with." This is your cue to move on. Now, you'll notice how the first 3 passengers are trying to draw you in, using whatever charms or supernatural powers they have at their disposal. Their ultimate goal is to trick you into leaving the bus. Needless to say, you must not do this, not if you want to make it home. Nobody knows what exactly happens to those who fall into one of their little traps. We do know that several members of our forum have vanished without a trace over the years, and my city has a long history of unexplained disappearances. The 4th passenger is different from the rest, however. He is a young male who sits on the back row whilst listening to headphones linked up to an 80s style Walkman. We call him Headphones Guy, and it seems all he does is listen to music. His eyes close as he taps his foot to the beat. The Headphones Guy will not attempt to engage with you or even acknowledge your presence. That's not to say he isn't dangerous, however. There was a member of our group who had a run-in with the guy. To be fair, it wasn't unprovoked. Feeling bold, my friend got right up in the passenger's face, waving his hands and clicking his fingers in an attempt to gain the spirit's attention. When this failed, he foolishly grabbed the guy's headphones, physically pulling them off his head. Predictably, Headphones Guy didn't react well to this violation. In an instant, he jumped up from his chair, lashing out with his fist and knocking his assailant down with one punch. My friend remembers a sharp, intense pain in the back of his head before he blacked out. The next thing he remembers is waking up in his own bed the next morning with a broken nose and a nasty gash on the back of his head. He also found a note in his jeans pocket, crudely written on the back of an old bus ticket in what looked like dried blood. And it read, "Do that again, and I'll rip your fucking head off." Unsurprisingly, my friend never rode the night bus again. I don't know what the headphones guy's deal is, but my advice is to leave him well alone. So, at this point, you're probably wondering why one would wish to catch the night bus at all, given how you'll be transported to a terrifying alternative reality and encounter otherworldly spirits who wish to trap you there. Well, the short answer is that no sane person would, bar a handful of crazed urban adventurers and amateur paranormal investigators such as myself. Most of those who boarded the Phantom coach have done so by accident, not realizing what they were getting themselves into until it was too late. And most of those who ride the bus once have no inclination to do so again. But those of us who do seek out the Phantom coach for a second, third, or, in my case, fourth occasion, well, we have our reasons. One reason above all others, in fact. We want to see the harbinger and ask him our one permitted question. I'll regret my first ride on the bus for the rest of my days. Although I was drunk, I had enough wits about me to see off the various tricks used by the ghosts. But I wasn't prepared for him. The harbinger is the only passenger who isn't already riding on the bus when you first get on. He comes later, after you've negotiated your way through the ghostly entities and you think the worst is behind you. The first thing you'll notice is the burning cross mounted on top of a darkened hillside, overlooking the road on the left-hand side. I remember the first time I saw that foreboding symbol in the immense fear I felt, as I knew something bad was coming. A moment after I spotted the cross, I was shocked to see the bus was slowing down, pulling over to the side of the road and parking up in a lay-by. Next, the driver operated the swing door at the front of the bus, opening it to whatever lay on the other side. The terror almost overwhelmed me as I thought of the horrors that lurked within the Shadowlands, of the creatures and demons hiding in the haunted woods and hillsides. I recall looking to the other passengers, somehow hoping these devious spirits would offer me some protection from whatever was coming. But instead their heads were down, as they all maintained a solemn silence. Realizing I was on my own, I glanced out the window to witness a sight which chilled me to my very bones. There was a small, covered shelter by the roadside, almost covered by overgrown vegetation and only just visible in the dim light. And within this seemingly abandoned bus shelter stood a tall, hooded figure, a sinister individual with his face covered in his considerable frame hidden underneath a long and dark robe. The mystery man remained still and silent, although I soon spotted the animal by his side, a large black dog that snarled aggressively through a snout filled with razor-sharp teeth. As it glared at me with hungry and predatory eyes, only a thin glass pane separating me from him, I imagined the hound breaking loose, ascending the steps and charging down the aisle, before burying its razor-sharp fangs into my soft flesh. Thankfully, the dog's master retained control of his beast. Although I was far from out of danger, I also noticed how hot and stifling it suddenly became, as an almost unbearable wave of heat hit me. Meanwhile, the bus remained parked for what seemed like an eternity, its door ajar as the driver waited to see whether his passenger would get on. Now, I've since learned that the hooded figure we call the Harbinger will do one of two things at this point. Either he will remain rooted to the spot until eventually the driver will say something like, "Well, not tonight then," before he closes the door and drives on. From what I've been able to gather from both my own experiences and those of my contemporaries, this is what happens most of the time. 2 times out of 3, the Harbinger won't step out from the bus shelter, and that will be the end of it. But sometimes he will step forward, marching through the mud in his heavy boots while dragging his hellhound along on a leash. And he'll come on board the bus, prompting the driver to say, "Good evening, sir. I trust you have a pleasant journey." The Harbinger will not answer, instead gliding down the aisle with his faithful mutt following behind him. He'll take a seat near the front of the bus, pulling down his hood to reveal what lies underneath. To this day, I can't fully explain what I saw in that terrifying moment. It seemed like there was only a dark void where his face would be, with 2 burning orbs instead of eyes. He had no mouth that I could see, and so, by rights, he shouldn't have been able to speak. And yet he did, calling out to me in a booming, godlike voice which echoed through the hollow interior of the bus. "Come to me, mortal child," he ordered. Come, sit with me, so we may speak." As you can imagine, I was utterly terrified in this moment. So much so that I thought I might pass out. But, for reasons I can't explain, I obeyed the Harbinger's orders, feeling like I physically could not resist him, and as if my legs were no longer under control. I remember looking to the other passengers as I walked down the aisle, hoping that one of them could help me. But each of the 4 kept their heads down as they muttered in unison, reciting a prayer in a language I could not understand. It became obvious that the Harbinger held power over these lost souls, and they were all trapped under his spell. Perhaps they were once like us, falling victim to the phantom bus and the Harbinger's godlike powers. In any event, they offered me no assistance in that fateful moment, and I soon realized I was completely at the Harbinger's mercy. I involuntarily took a seat in the row directly behind the Harbinger, his head turned in an unnatural way to face me, as his dog snarled aggressively in my direction, but thankfully resisted the urge to bite me in the leg. I can't really describe how the Harbinger smelled, other than to say he stank of death. The fiery orbs he had instead of eyes stared right at me, and I couldn't look away, no matter how much I tried. I felt like I was on fire, my soul burning under his hateful glare. In my state of abject terror, I imagined what this monster might do to me. I reckoned he could kill me with ease, but this was the least of my fears. Instead, I believed I may have become like the others, another anonymous lost soul, writing this damn verse for all eternity. In any event, I was powerless to do anything in that moment other than remain frozen to my seat, waiting for the harbinger to speak. Despite his absence of eyes, somehow I could tell he was looking down on me, and he considered me with total contempt, like I was something he'd stepped in. To this day, I don't know whether he was speaking out loud or if his booming voice was only in my head. Either way, I found myself totally transfixed as he spoke his words. I see the mere mortal has found his way into my realm, he began. I assumed he was referring to me. I'll confess to having little time for your contemptible and weak grace. Nevertheless, I must respect the bravery of the odd individual such as yourself. Not many have the courage to come to this dark place. For this reason, I will grant you safe passage, and I will answer you one question. Ask me what you will, mere mortal, and I will impart to you my infinite knowledge. Now, this is a moment I've replayed over and over again in my mind over the years. I literally could have asked the harbinger anything. The winning lottery numbers. Who killed JFK? The meaning of life. He sees and knows everything, and the possibilities are limitless. One of the guys on our forum asked the harbinger how he would die and was told that his vices would kill him within 6 months. Well, this guy was an addict, but he laughed off the harbinger's warning and continued using. 6 months later, he was dead from an overdose. And then there was a young woman who, at the time of her encounter with the harbinger, was stuck in an abusive and controlling relationship. She asked the entity what would happen if she stayed with her asshole boyfriend. Well, she was told that her life would end unless she broke off the relationship. This proved to be the motivation she needed to leave him. And about a year later, the bastard was arrested for murdering another girl and ultimately sentenced to life in prison. But of course, I didn't know any of this at the time. I felt nothing but pure terror as I sat frozen to my seat, quaking in my boots as the harbinger glared down upon me with disgust. In that chilling moment, I could only think of one question to ask, which I stuttered out from my trembling lips. What are you? I swore I could hear the creature's cough with contempt before he gave me his answer. My poor child, he bellowed. Alas, you humans will never fully comprehend what I am and what I represent. Nevertheless, I owe you an answer, and so I shall explain in the simplest of terms. I am the past, the present, and the future. I see all from where I stand, and yet I have sworn not to interfere in the mortal realm. He paused momentarily, turning his orbs towards the darkened landscape outside the window. This world you see before me is my kingdom, my domain. I offer sanctuary to those who have nowhere else to go. giving a home to those lost souls trapped between the mortal and eternal realms. Perhaps you will come here one day and became a permanent resident of my dark realm. Or perhaps not. You could have inquired after your alternate fate, of course, but you chose not to do so. But I have answered your one permitted question and fulfilled my obligation. And now, my child, I will bid you farewell. With that, he rose from his chair and summoned his hound, gliding down the aisle as he made for the exit. I was flabbergasted and in a state of shock. I still had so many questions to ask, and I opened my mouth without thinking. "Wait!" I called after him, instantly regretting my decision to speak. The harbinger turned sharply, his orb-like eyes burning ever fiercer, his hound growling as it bared its sharp teeth, pulling on its lead as it tried to get at me. When the harbinger spoke again, his tone became angry and threatening. "Heed my warning, you damn fool! I have tolerated your presence in my realm thus far, but do not test my patience. I can inflict pain upon you which goes beyond your worst nightmares, and I will not hesitate to do so if you break my rules again." I felt all the blood drain from my face, and my whole body shook uncontrollably as sheer terror overcame me. Needless to say, I did not utter another word. Instead, I watched on in shocked awe as the harbinger glided down the aisle, dragging his snarling hellhound with him. The driver brought the bus to a slow halt to allow the godlike creature to disembark. I began to feel pangs of relief as I thought my ordeal was nearly over. But there was one last twist to his macabre episode. As the harbinger stepped off the coach, my fellow passengers suddenly shot up from their seats, all simultaneously turning in my direction. To my horror, I saw how their eyes had turned jet black, and their mouths were open wide, revealing gaping black holes. It seemed like they were all trying to scream, and yet no sound was emitted. And then I saw what was lurking in the darker woods on either side of the road. Hundreds of fiery red eyes emerging from the tree line, belonging to unholy beasts that howled like wolves in the night. Every one focused upon our bus. I screamed out in terror, fearing that the harbinger had changed his mind and was summoning his hellish minions to tear me to pieces. The howling rapidly increased in volume, becoming so loud that I was near deafened. What happened next remains something of a blur in my memory. I recall the horrific din, and the pressure built up inside my head until I thought my skull would explode. Suddenly, there was a blinding flash of light, forcing me to hide my eyes underneath my hands. A moment later, I opened my eyes again, only to discover that the beast had vanished, as had my ghoulish fellow passengers. I was on my own inside the bus, just me and the driver, as we continued down that lonely stretch of road. I have very little recollection of the rest of that journey. I don't think it was much longer before we left the dark realm and returned to the city streets I knew and recognized. When we arrived on my home street, I could not believe it, thinking this was another trick. I sat still in my seat for some time, until eventually I needed to be prompted by the driver, who called out to me, saying, "You're stopped, my friend. Come on now, please. I can't wait here all night." With some trepidation, I walked down the aisle and stepped off the bus, feeling the cool, fresh air against my skin as I returned to the realm of the living. I recall the driver wishing me good night and saying, "I'll see you again," before he drove away. So, that's my story. But it's not quite the end of it. You may well ask why I didn't abandon my obsession with the phantom bus after my terrifying encounter. Well, for a long time, I did. But in the end, my curiosity got the better of me. I don't like the uncertainty of life, of not knowing what lays before me. I used to think that's just the way it is, but now I know better. The Harbinger is out there, and he can provide the answers I need. I won't waste my opportunity a second time. For years I have chased the bus, and I've got it a further 2 times. On both occasions, I boarded and avoided the traps set by the ghoulish passengers. And both times, I waited for the Harbinger to board, but he would not move from his shelter, and so my hopes were frustrated. It's been extremely disheartening, but I will not give up. Tonight, I will seek out the bus once again, and I'll keep doing so until the Harbinger answers my call. I know the risk. One night, I may board the phantom coach and never make it home. But nevertheless, I need to do this. I must know the truth, no matter what the cost. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a bus to catch.